Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury, the part of Let's Talk where we discuss the fiction of the Grand Master himself, Ray Bradbury. Today, I want to discuss one of his short stories, Season of Disbelief, which was published November 1950 in Collier's Magazine. Stories about Mrs. Bentley, who is a widow in her 70s. She lives alone in a home that has been cluttered with keepsakes and memories, all orderly compiled and stacked away, as you often find in an elderly person's house. One day, 3 kids show up on her lawn, and they get to talking to her, and they can't imagine that she ever had a first name, Helen, or that she was ever young and beautiful, and they disbelieve that she must have been old forever, and that old people were just a type of being, and that young people were young forever. But she tried to convince them of her childhood by showing them some keepsakes of her life. To the girl, she showed like an old comb and a barrette and even a picture. They insisted that these things must have been stolen from a little girl because she couldn't possibly have ever been little. They steal these things. They run away with them and say, oh, they belong to somebody else. And at first, this really shakes her. And that night, she's laying in bed, and there's a cane in the corner, which used to belong to her late husband. It falls over in the breeze, and she sees this as a message. And she gets sort of having an internal conversation with him as she lays there in bed. And he tells her that, you know, you've been collecting these things for years, and you're always living in the past, and you're never living where you are, so you're missing your life in a way. And he basically warns her of missing out and, you know, try to live in the present. So she vows to do this. The next day, she goes about giving away some of her possessions to the kids. She also destroys a lot of them and sends a lot of things out to the curb to go into the garbage. And then the next time she talks to the kids, she insists that, yes, I've been an old lady forever. I am just Mrs. Bentley. I've never been Helen. And that I was never, ever young, not in a million trillion years, according to her own words. The story goes from sort of charming, sort of vintage 50s Americana feel, which is an illusion, of course. That world does not exist, never did exist, but at least the version of the 50s that we saw in television. But it goes from that to sort of alarming in a very, very short amount of time. You know, it begins with that 50s wholesomeness, sort of everybody's memory of their own grandparents, at least in my imagination. But it quickly becomes mournful, filled with this woman's regret of the way she's lived her life, and sort of wishing that there had been a way to really preserve the past, but it seems that the past is really not preservable, not in pictures and keepsakes and ornaments and trinkets like that, which is something that we do. You know, as people, we try to save things. At least most people do. I'm not really into saving, but there was a time when I was a younger man, you know, like my 20s, when I tried to save things, and I quickly realized that, you know, just by having these pictures albums around, I wasn't really saving the past. And she sort of goes into that. Or she sort of reaches that conclusion by the end of the story by giving these things up, but she takes it to a different level. She actually sort of gives up her complete identity, basically denies her youth, and basically plays into the children's fantasy that she was always old. So yeah, guys, deceptively simple, vintage, sort of classic Ray Bradbury storytelling. It's one of these stories that seems so simple that it's like, how the hell could I not have written it myself? But yet you sat down to write these things, and it doesn't happen that way, because Ray Bradbury was, of course, a master. Pulls at the heartstrings for a while, but then sort of finishes up with that Twilight Zone-esque weirdness that is present in many of Bradbury's story. I think Bradbury is most notably known as this science fiction author, but the best of his work is sort of in this sort of suspense, thriller, mystery, all these other genres that have a touch of the supernatural sometimes, but they're mainly more sort of mainstream literary in their form, I think. He's, as much as I love the sci-fi elements, I think he's, although he's greatly respected, I think he, for the most part, never reached, or has yet to reach, the audience, sort of the would say, the academic approval that he should have gotten. You know, Fahrenheit 451 gets it. A couple of his short stories, The Veldt, for example, There Will Come Soft Rains, but he has literally hundreds of stories that belong in, like, school textbooks. And this is one of them. It's among one of his 100 most celebrated stories, according to the text on the volume, which I will be exploring further here on Let's Talk. So stick with me over the next several months and years until I finish this project. And we'll keep coming back and reminiscing about the great works of Ray Bradbury. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you again soon.